Right now on Morning News Now, history at the DNC as Vice President Kamala Harris formally accepts the Democratic Party's nomination for president.
On behalf of every American, regardless of party, race, gender, or the language your grandmother speaks, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
The Vice President closing out the convention by calling on all Americans to unite. That's after a star-studded final day featuring familiar faces from Hollywood to D.C. We have team coverage from Chicago with more of the VP's message and how it could impact the November election. Also this morning, ready for relief. Federal officials signaling an interest rate cut that could be just weeks away. Plus, back on track for now, promising developments in Canada's rail work stoppage and its effects on America's economy. And growing emergency. This morning, new concerns about an outbreak of mpox as a more transmissible, deadlier strain of the virus spreads worldwide. The warning from doctors and what you can do to stay healthy. Plus, get that popcorn ready. It is Friday, and that means there's a lot to stream and see this weekend. From a remake of a cult classic to a thriller not for the weak of heart, and everything in between. We'll run you through everything on our can't miss list. Good morning. Thanks for being here. I'm Stephen Romo in for Joe in Savannah today. And we do begin with that historic Democratic National Convention, which just wrapped up in Chicago. Vice President Kamala Harris is now the first woman of color to accept a major party's nomination for president. The final night of that convention was focused on introducing Harris, her career, and some of her policy goals. The mood there was electric as performers and speakers took to the stage leading up to Harris's big address. And during her keynote, Harris talked about her upbringing and life lessons she's learned, particularly from her mother, while also using those moments to explain how she plans to bring the country together if she's elected.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. Our opponents in this race are out there every day denigrating America, talking about how terrible everything is. Well, my mother had another lesson she used to teach. Never let anyone tell you who you are. You show them who you are. Our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward. You can always trust me to put country above party and self, to hold sacred America's fundamental principles, from the rule of law to free and fair elections to the peaceful transfer of power. Together, let us write the next great chapter in the most extraordinary story ever told.
Well, for more on last night, let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. He's been covering the convention and joins us now from Chicago. Mike, good morning to you. So we just heard parts of Vice President Harris's history-making address there, and there's been a lot of excitement for the previous speakers as well. So how did the audience respond to that main event?
Well, Stephen, this really has been talked about as a vibes convention. The word joy used so often from delegates we've been talking to and even from the stage to talk about this new sense of excitement around the Democratic ticket just only months into the making here. But you certainly saw that in the anticipation that was building throughout the night for Vice President Harris's remarks. You also saw that in the crowd. So many women and even a few men wearing white as a nod to the suffragist movement, the historic nature of Kamala Harris's candidacy, the potential potential first woman president, not lost on that audience. Interestingly, even though we heard Harris in her speech talk about her journey as an unlikely one, nodding to the fact that only a month ago there was a different nominee at the top of the ticket, she did not make explicit reference to the fact that she could make history as the first woman president. She did lean heavily on her biography throughout her remarks, talking about the influence her mother in particular had on her life. She talked about her policy goals as well, talking about the fact that, for instance, on immigration, she would sign that bipartisan reform. She really spoke out against Donald Trump, calling him an unserious person. What was so striking, though, was the way in which this convention and the vice president herself in her remarks last night tried to win back patriotism. We saw that in her criticism of the Republican ticket for denigrating America. We also saw that in what was always a highlight of every convention, 100,000 red, white, and blue balloons falling from the sky, USA signs, flags all around the arena. This was an effort to try to show that Democrats are a patriotic party and one focused on the future, in contrast to the Republican ticket, Stephen.
It's certainly fascinating that she's leaving it to others to talk about the history of her nomination. Meanwhile, President Biden, he was not there, but we understand he called the vice president right before her speech. Do we know anything about what was said there?
Yeah, obviously a very bittersweet moment for the president. This was obviously a night he was expecting to accept renomination. Instead, he was in California with his family. We saw this photo, obviously the White House tweeting it, the president saying in that tweet that he called to congratulate and wish Kamala Harris luck in her speech. He talked about the fact that he couldn't wait to watch and that she and Tim Walz would inspire the nation. The vice president using her remarks right at the top to thank President Biden. She said that she's filled with gratitude, that his record is historic and his character is inspiring. History will show that. This is a relationship, obviously, between these two that developed, especially over these last 4 years in the White House. That handoff, that clean handoff, once Biden made that decision not to run, was so important in setting up what Democrats feel was just an incredibly successful convention now.
A lot of momentum there. Even the roll call was exciting here, Mike. So what's next for the Harris campaign? It's usually a challenge to try to keep up that momentum post-convention. Do we know how they're going to spend the weekend, for example?
Yeah, it is unusual, Stephen, because momentum is such a powerful force in politics, and you would usually see the ticket travel together, barnstorm some of the battleground states coming out of the convention. We're not seeing that in this case, partially because of the unusual circumstances that led to Harris leading the ticket. She announced her running mate a bit earlier before the convention. They had that battleground state tour coming into the convention, and at the moment there is not much of a public schedule in terms of campaign events. We did see Vice President Harris and Governor Walz make the rounds last night after her speech. They went to a few parties. The vice president talking about the fact that this is still going to be a lot of work, that they're going to try and carry that momentum moving forward. She said, tonight we are partying. Tomorrow we will get back to work.
A fascinating campaign cycle. All right, Mike Memley, thanks so much. And now let's bring in NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. He was also at the convention and joins us now from Chicago. Mark, good morning to you. So there seems to be at least two major policy areas where the Harris campaign wants to set itself apart from the Trump campaign. And one, of course, is abortion, and the other is border security. Harris has been criticized, though, by some for not giving details or as many details as people want on policies. So did we learn much from her speech on those policies?
Yeah, Stephen, we actually did learn, and she ended up outlining some of the actions she would take if she becomes president. And first, when it came to abortion, and she ended up saying that if president, she would end up signing legislation into law protecting reproductive rights. And, you know, that's actually very similar to what we've seen from President Biden saying and Democrats across the country. Abortion is an issue that Democrats are leading on. They use the convention throughout the 4 days to attack Donald Trump. And Harris ended up attacking Donald Trump on the issue of abortion as well. Take a listen.
He plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their minds.
And Stephen, of course, these attacks aren't all that surprising. Democrats have hammered Donald Trump and Republicans since Roe versus Wade's overturning. Democrats continue to hold an advantage on the issue on abortion.
Abortion and the border as well, something that she spoke about. The former president actually spent yesterday touring part of the southern border in Arizona, and he used that as a backdrop to promote his closed border policies. And on the Democratic side, so what do we know about Vice President Harris and what she's saying about her proposed border policies?
Yeah, Stephen, as I said, if Democrats had the advantage on abortion, they're facing a deficit when it comes to the border and immigration. And Donald Trump was on the border yesterday attacking her. But in the convention last night, Harris ended up using a line which she said before, that she would end up as president signing into law legislation on a tough border bill, the one that Donald Trump asked Republicans to walk away from. If you recall, there was a compromise legislation in the Senate by Republicans and Democrats to bolster border funding as well as protect immigrants. And Harris ended up saying if she ends up becoming president, she would sign that legislation into law. Take a listen.
After decades in law enforcement, I know the importance of safety and security, especially at our border. Last year, Joe and I brought together Democrats and conservative Republicans to write the strongest border bill in decades. The Border Patrol endorsed it.
But that was the one part of immigration in her speech last night. And of course, she ended up having other ideas that she would end up actions that she would also take as president.
Yeah, more questions to come on that front. Meanwhile, we know the president, former President Trump, is planning a rally later today, also in Arizona, in Glendale, where independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is expected to attend and talk about a, quote, path forward. Now, there's been a lot of speculation that this is his plan to endorse Trump. What do we know about that?
Yeah, according to two sources, Stephen, we expect RFK Jr. to withdraw from the presidential contest and endorse Donald Trump. And we further can report that some of the people who have been encouraging RFK Jr. to drop out of the race are none other than Donald Trump Jr., the former president's son, as well as former Fox host Tucker Carlson. And so this kind of adds to the Trump world working hand in hand with Kennedy on this decision. Of course, we need to see what he ends up saying, but the expectation is that he will end up endorsing Trump.
Another wild ride. All right, Mark Murray, thanks so much. And while the former president was campaigning in Arizona, NBC News correspondent Garrett Hake had the opportunity to speak with Trump one-on-one about his plan for the border and beyond.
Former President Trump holding that event here at the border in the midst of an ongoing manhunt. We've since learned the suspect has been arrested. All of it as I pressed the former president on his immigration plans and how he'd pay for them. Former President Trump holding an event in the shadow of the Arizona border wall. As the sheriff here announced, there's a manhunt for a suspect wanted on unrelated warrants who also threatened to kill a presidential candidate. Multiple law enforcement sources tell NBC News it's Trump. The former president saying he wasn't told about the threat.
And I have great respect for Secret Service.
Trump is in the midst of a battleground blitz, with sources telling NBC News Robert Kennedy Jr. is planning to endorse him tomorrow, though talks are still ongoing. We've been reporting that RFK Jr. is getting ready to endorse you. What role would he have either with your campaign or in your administration?
Well, I don't want to get too much into it because you're telling me something I don't know, other than I've always been friendly with him. If he were going to endorse me, I would consider it a great honor.
That's despite all the things he said about vaccine, 9/11 conspiracies. Does that reflect on you if you put him in your administration?
No, it doesn't mean administration, but certainly having his endorsement, because things that he agrees on, I also agree on. You know, there are many things that are perhaps the opposite of what you're saying, but he's a respected guy.
And we asked about the Democratic convention. What do you make of the attacks against you last night?
Well, that's all they have, because they're failed. They failed on the border, as you can see. They failed on the economy. They failed on jobs.
Today, Trump going after Vice President Harris on border security.
She wants to have an open border.
But we pressed him on his plan for mass deportation. He offered no plan to pay for it. It's going to cost billions of dollars. Where will that money come from?
Well, it'll cost trillions of dollars to keep these people, and I'm talking about in particular starting with the criminals.
Earlier, we spoke to an undocumented immigrant from Mexico who came here 20 years ago and has 2 children who are American citizens. I don't think that people can possibly understand what it feels like to live with that fear of deportation, she told us. If you're trying to deport millions of people, that would perhaps include mixed families. Will you separate families to get to those goals?
Provisions will be made, but we have to get the criminals out. We have murderers in our country. They just walk in. We have over 20 million people. In my opinion, over 20 million people came in, and the number is growing every single day.
And our thanks to Garrett Hake for that report. Now to the Federal Reserve, and where Chairman Jerome Powell is expected to deliver a highly anticipated speech later today that could give new clues about the future at the central bank. Wall Street expects the Fed to start cutting interest rates next month. There are still questions about the extent and the timing of the cuts. Here to talk more about this is Investopedia's editor-in-chief, Caleb Silver. Caleb, thanks for being here this morning. So, as we mentioned, they're predicting those first rate cuts could come next month. What else are we hoping to learn from Powell's speech?
Well, we've had this uptick in unemployment, right? And we had a big revision to the job gains over the last 12 months. In fact, 818,000 fewer jobs were added than the government thought through the BLS. So that's a big deal. The Fed has 2 jobs, right? Monetary policy, keep inflation down, that's coming down, and keep us at full employment, between 3.5% and 4% employment. Well, the unemployment rate's 4.3%. We had this big revision. So is the labor market weakening enough that the Fed may have to cut more than a quarter point at that September 18th meeting? That is in 26 days, 6 hours, and 45 minutes. I'm not counting, but a lot of people are expecting this first cut. Will it be a deeper cut, a 0.5%? And then what's the pace of cuts going to be after that? Because when we look at the Fed's dot plot, which is the projection of where Fed rates should be next year, that is somewhere between 4% and 5.5%. Then it goes down to about 3 to 4% in 2026.
Well, fascinating. So if the Fed actually does end up with these cuts next month, what can people expect to be the most immediate impact that they could see?
Yeah, you're already seeing it in the mortgage market, where the 30-year fix has gone from about 7.5% to below 6.5%. That is opening up the housing market. More people applying for a mortgage, even refinancing applications are rising. You'll see it there. You'll also see it in anything you're financing, a new car payment, right? The loans, the interest rate for new cars is something like 6 to 7%, but credit card APRs is the big one, right? Yeah. Those are at 25% right now. That's a record high, and we know credit card debt is at a record high. So once those come down, that could ease borrowing costs for consumers.
That's a direct impact for consumers, certainly. While we have you here, I did want to ask about the situation with Canada's rail companies. We know that thousands of unionized workers were actually locked out yesterday, but we know the government there is trying to order some arbitration to get things back on track. What's the situation there, and how is that going to possibly impact the United States?
Well, it looks like it's going to be resolved, at least for now. Steve McKinnon, that's the Canadian Labour Minister, told the Canadian Industrial Labour Relations Board to make them get back to work and do a deal with this Teamsters, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Kansas City. That looks like it may be resolved, but it looks like right now they're going to get back to work. Trains should be rolling later today, according to the Canadian government, and through the weekend. But this is 9,000 workers, unionized workers here, that have been locked out of their job in Canada, a big exporter, and that's a big part of their economy, potash and oil.
And so for us here in the United States, when we look at the situation in Canada, obviously a really close neighbor, a trade partner as well, if they are not able to actually move that through, what does it end up happening here in the U.S.?
It just means the supply chain, which is something we were dealing with a few years ago, gets a little bit gummier right now because we do get a lot of exports from Canada, but it looks like it's going to be resolved. The operations from those railroads in the United States unaffected. It's raw material coming in from Canada that we have to worry about. That could drive prices higher. But right now, it looks like there's a resolution at play.
Supply chain. I got really tired of saying those words just a couple of years ago.
Me too.
All right. Caleb Silver, thanks so much for your time today. All right, new data this morning shows more Americans are at risk of wildfires than ever before. FEMA says at least 1 in every 3 Americans now live in areas where fires can quickly grow out of control. They say the weather conditions which allow them to spread are becoming increasingly common, and it's not just out west. NBC News national climate reporter Chase Kane shows us why this could be a record-breaking wildfire season and how forecasters are adapting.
This year has brought roughly the same number of fires as usual, but those fires have become big. burning more than 3 times as much land as last year. More than 5.5 million acres so far, filling skies with smoke coast to coast. And we're still approaching the peak season.
And a new analysis from Climate Central shows that it's being driven by an increase in the number of fire weather days. Days which are hot, dry, and windy, kind of like this. It's a signature of climate change.
When you have fire weather, you can't do things like prescribed burning, at least not safely. So it really kind of gets you from both sides.
Parts of California, Colorado, Washington, and Texas have already seen more fire weather days so far this year than they typically have in an entire year. And again, the peak season is still ahead.
You can kind of think of it as like rolling a pair of dice.
Andrew Moore forecasts fire weather conditions across the U.S. from NOAA's Storm Prediction Center in Oklahoma.
And so you might have really hot, dry, windy conditions one day, but maybe you don't get the ignition, you don't get the fire. But like I said, you keep rolling those dice. And as the climate keeps getting warmer, you're just rolling the dice more and more often, so you have more chances to start big fires.
And that's part of why NOAA is expanding their fire weather team. Climate change means all 50 states face risk.
But there's definitely been an uptick in the severity of the fires, and in particular with people moving closer to the forest or embedding within the forest, the danger to society is much greater. And so we're seeing these catastrophic wildfires much more frequently within the United States.
In fact, FEMA now says 1 in every 3 Americans lives in an area like this, where homes mingle with forests and other wildlands. Some people are moving out of cities and towns to find cheaper housing, while others, even those who know the risk, just love being next to nature.
Moved up here because we just love living in the woods. Now I hindsight, second guess that.
And as Americans continue moving to areas prone to fire, FEMA says the risk area is increasing by 2 million acres every year. At the same time, human-caused climate change brings more fire weather days, even where you might not expect, like Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Virginia. In Los Angeles, I'm national climate reporter Chase Kane.
Well, from fires to heat, millions of Americans are under a heat alert today. So let's check in with your Morning News Now weather with meteorologist Angie Lastman. Hey, Angie.
Hi there, Stephen. We, of course, have another day of really warm temperatures across the South. I sound like a broken record when I talk about this because it's been days and days of these heat alerts, mainly centered across parts of Texas, a little bit of Oklahoma, and parts of New Mexico. So this morning, 16 million of you are included in that. Dallas, Waco, Oklahoma City, Roswell, all of those major cities are included as well. And these are likely going to last over the next couple of days. We unfortunately don't have a whole lot in the way of relief for that region of the country. But here's what we do have. Temperatures into the triple digits for Lubbock today. We're running nearly 15 degrees above normal, so it's going to be hot. It's going to be another day where the AC is cranked up, and you got to find a place to cool down. Even Denver, a little on the warm side, high 80s for you there. Dodge City, parts of Kansas, you'll end up into the mid-90s. Notice, though, how much nicer it is across parts of the Pacific Northwest. We have a little bit of some of that cool air and even some unsettled conditions kind of working their way in. So places like Reno, you're just going to top out into the low 70s today. Low 60s for Bend, Oregon. That temperature about 20 degrees below where we should be for this time of year. So as we get into tomorrow, that heat expands. It does really include most of the midsection of the country. So if you're in Cheyenne, if you're in Sioux Falls, even if you're in Wichita, your temperatures are going to be on the warm side of things. Chicago expected to go back to the 90s. I know that's going to be a little bit of a weather whiplash considering it's been feeling like fall across much of the Great Lakes and even the Northeast over the past couple of days, but it's going to feel like summer here as we get into our weekend. Even chillier out in portions of the Pacific Northwest, LA ending up into the low 70s. Now, as we get into next week, we'll still be dealing with the heat for the middle of the country, 89 on Sunday, but we get a little bit of a break for Denver into the low 80s on Monday, but we're right back to the mid 80s by the time Tuesday comes around. Similar story for St. Louis, but even warmer. We peak at 97 degrees on Monday, so hopefully not putting those summer clothes away just yet after the kind of cool air that we had settled in for a little while of this work week. But next work week, more of the same. It's going to feel like late August in a lot of spots. Chicago heads to the mid 90s for Monday. We've got the mid to upper 90s on tap for Louisville here as we get into Monday and Tuesday. And even New York City, those mid 80s take shape for the last part of our weekend. And then as we get into our work week, we'll kind of moderate out into the mid 80s. Here's a look at the big picture for your day today. It's otherwise pleasant. I mean, even across most of the east. We're talking about mainly dry conditions. A couple of trouble spots when it comes to the rain. The Pacific Northwest I mentioned, but the Rockies, you can see some of those showers and thunderstorms across that area. Denver, you're included in that. And then Florida, you have been unsettled for days and days, and unfortunately, that's not going to come to an end anytime soon. We'll still be dealing with the showers and thunderstorms across the Sunshine State, even into tomorrow, and unfortunately into Sunday, too. But a great weekend everywhere else, really, across the east. Look at all that sunshine out there, Stephen. It'll be hot, like I said, for the middle of the country, but plenty of sunshine to kind of get those last couple of weekends of summer in and any of those activities that you want. It'll be even hotter on Sunday for the middle of the country. And those Florida storms, they just won't quit to wrap up our weekend.
You know, since moving to New York, I've become familiar with the term false fall.
Oh, yes.
I really felt it. And then Starbucks with the pumpkin spice.
No, I stand against the PSL this early.
I'm surprised.
Let us just live our last couple of weekends of summer.
Let us enjoy it. Come on, y'all.
The leaves aren't turning just yet.
That's right. That should be the barometer. I like
agree.
that. See, barometer, it's a weather word.
Glad we're on the same page.
Very good. All right. Thanks so much, Angie. Well, more to come this morning on Morning News Now. Later this hour, campus controversy. Why freshman enrollment numbers at MIT are renewing the debate over the Supreme Court's ruling to end affirmative action. Up first, after the break, some breaking news. Tragic developments in the search for the final victim of a sunken super yacht off the Sicilian coast. We'll be right back. We're back now with some breaking news out of Italy. This morning, rescue teams reported recovering the body of the final person who went missing after a super yacht sunk off the coast of Sicily earlier this week. Although the body has not yet been officially identified, 18-year-old Hannah Lynch is reportedly unaccounted for. She's the daughter of the British tech magnate Mike Lynch, who was among the 7 people who died. His wife was one of the 15 who survived. Well, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv this morning for talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. This visit is reportedly aimed at strengthening ties between the two countries, and it comes more than a month after Modi met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. All of this as Ukraine steps up its attacks inside Russia. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin brings us the latest.
New video shows a critical ferry terminal which helps connect mainland Russia to occupied Crimea on fire. Russian officials blame Kyiv. So far, no comment from the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian Air Force released footage of another attack on Russia, pointedly saying it shows a U.S.-made bomb being dropped on a Russian platoon base in the Kursk region. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the closest he's been to Kursk since Ukraine's surprise invasion. He says he wants the region to become a buffer zone on Russian soil to help protect major Ukrainian cities to the east, including Kharkiv, where we saw firsthand how in recent months the Russians have been relentlessly bombing civilians, including this shopping mall. Nina Korsanova says she was working back in May, the day of the Russian rocket attack. CCTV footage shows her walking through the store, and then I fell on the floor. Everything was falling on me, she says. And then I remember seeing the second rocket strike. Miraculously, she survived. That same month, across the city, a recreational campsite also attacked. Camp manager Arthur Burdov tried to save a pregnant woman, but he says she was already dead. He was later hit in his leg and hand. A Ukrainian war crimes prosecutor tells NBC News that ever since the Kursk incursion, there has been only one airstrike on this city. In Kharkiv, at least, there's relief and fear. The calm is temporary.
Well, for more international headlines, including new developments in ceasefire negotiations in the Middle East, NBC News international correspondent Megan Fitzgerald joins us now with more. Megan, good morning.
Stephen, good morning. That's right. We start in the Middle East with the Israel-Hamas war. The latest there is the negotiations, the ceasefire negotiations, which have been focused on this narrow strip of land that connects Egypt and Gaza. It's called the Philadelphia Corridor. Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel has said that Hamas uses this to smuggle weapons into Gaza and wants Israeli troops stationed there permanently. But Hamas denies this and claims Netanyahu is just obstructing a potential ceasefire deal. It's a major sticking point in the negotiations. And in Venezuela, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of President Maduro's claim that he won the contested presidential election in July. The decision comes as Maduro has faced massive protests and international criticism after the elections, where he sought his third 6-year term. The Supreme Court says voting tallies published online that show Maduro lost by a landslide were forged. And in Iceland, a volcano has erupted for the 6th time since December. It happened on Thursday. The Icelandic Met Office says the total length of the fissures was about 2.5 miles long. The good news here is that officials say lives are not in danger. The area nearby has been evacuated. But these eruptions show the challenge the country is facing, because keep in mind, scientists are warning that the peninsula could see repeated outbreaks like this for decades or even centuries to come. Stephen?
Wow, startling to hear. Beautiful video, though, but not the kind you want to get there. All right, Megan Fitzgerald, thanks so much.
Right.
Well, coming up, an outbreak in Africa is now a global emergency. Up next, what doctors want you to know about mpox as a new, even more contagious form of the disease spreads in Asia. You're watching Morning News Now. We're back now with the latest on the new mpox outbreak. This morning, Thailand confirmed Asia's first known case of a new and potentially deadlier strain of the virus called Clade 1b. And now other Asian countries are ramping up precautions to try to prevent the spread. For more, let's bring in immunologist and virologist Dr. Rick Bright. He's also an advisor for the Center for Advanced Preparedness and Threat Response Simulation. Dr. Bright, good morning. Thanks for being here to help us understand this. So we had one strain that had popped up in countries like Sweden and Singapore, but now we have this new strain that is also making headlines. So what is the difference there, and just how concerned should we be?
Well, Stephen, good morning, and thanks for raising awareness around this. Everyone, I think most people are familiar with mpox now, especially after the widespread of Clade 2, we'll call it, back in 2022 that really affected the U.S. and many countries around the world. There are two different types of mpox. We call them clades, and the other is Clade 1. It's been circulating in some countries in Africa for some time. However, it's recently mutated into what we call this Clade 1b. Now, this Clade 1b we're seeing can spread more easily than the Clade 2 we're more familiar with. And as it spreads, it appears to be more severe, especially in children and people with really weak immune systems. And so it was initially just in Central Africa. Now it's in about 5 different countries in Africa. And we're finding the first cases in travelers that have been to Africa, one in Sweden and one in Thailand now. So it's important to keep a close eye out for it.
Certainly. And we also mentioned the new precautions that some other countries are taking. For example, Singapore cutting off direct flights to confirmed mpox outbreak countries. And this all feels pretty familiar. Are we at risk at all of seeing those COVID restrictions that were so prevalent a couple years ago?
You know, I hope not. I mean, we learned a lot through COVID, and we learned that travel bans don't really work to stop the spread of a virus. And so what's really important is that countries are vigilant and they have strong surveillance systems in place. I really want to acknowledge the one case in Sweden and the one case in Thailand right now were caught really early with travelers who just arrived in those countries within a day or two. They had symptoms. They sought out medical care. The clinicians recognized the situation very early, did the testing, isolated the patient, and reported that information, which was really important. And that raises awareness, and that really brings attention to other people who may have traveled or may have had experiences that might have exposed them to this virus, so they can seek early treatment. We can isolate those patients and we can track the virus. There's really not a need for travel bans or to block travel from any country. A virus anywhere is a virus everywhere. It's more important to detect it early to put in precautions, to be able to identify and treat people, and to really make sure that we're vaccinating around the world to try to stop the virus from spreading.
Yeah, since you mentioned that, quickly wanted to get your take on the vaccine. The last outbreak in the U.S., we had a big push, particularly in the gay community, to get that vaccine. What is the latest on that front and the availability of it?
Well, you know, it's really interesting. The clade 2 that we saw the outbreak and the clade 2 mpox, where we saw the outbreak in 2022, is still around. And so many of the cases and reports that you're hearing now about an mpox patient in the U.S. or many countries around the world are still those clade 2 cases that, again, we need to watch very closely. And you're right, that is circulating primarily in the social groups and men who have sex with men. And there is still a vaccine available in the U.S. and around the world, and the CDC still does recommend people in those high-risk groups and those social groups to get that vaccine, and they should be doing so. And we really need to focus on the new cases of clade 1b and make sure we're doing everything to help stop that in Africa and make sure that we're vigilant and detect it early if it does spread.
Certainly important to keep aware of all that. Dr. Rick Bright, thanks so much. Well, coming up, college football fans, your time has come again. After the break, we're heading across the pond to Ireland, where Florida State and Georgia Tech will face off in a season opener that's set to draw tens of thousands of fans. We've got a preview of that action coming up next. Welcome back. As a new semester gets underway, we have new information on race and enrollment. New data from MIT suggests this year's freshman class is not as diverse as previous years. Those numbers show Black and Latino student enrollment has dropped significantly, and the Dean of Admissions says last year's affirmative action ban is to blame. Georgetown law professor Michelle Goodwin joins us now for a closer look at these numbers and the impact. Professor, good morning, and thanks for being here. So the university says about 5% of the incoming class of 2028 is made up of Black students, a significant drop from their 13% average in recent years. So what are your initial thoughts on these numbers?
Well, it's worth noting that it's not just African-American students, it's also lower enrollment of students who are Latino. It is no enrollment, it appears, of students who are Indigenous, and it appears that there is an increase in the enrollment of white students and an increase in the enrollment of Asian students. One also wants to look at first-generation students, of which there is a very, very low percentage of students that are first-generation who've been admitted.
Well, whenever this ruling happened about affirmative action, is this the result you were expecting?
I think that this is the result that many were expecting. And if we go back to the decision itself, which was a split decision, but authored by the Chief Justice, John Roberts, what he said is that policies such as the affirmative action programs that were in place at North Carolina and Harvard, that they lacked a measurable outcome, and that the outcome itself was difficult to discern. He suggested that this was a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And there that raises significant questions. For example, the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution was a race-based remedy coming out of slavery, where individuals were denied a myriad opportunities, including educational opportunities. So it's a different reading of the 14th Amendment than what the 14th Amendment was originally cast as. And predictably, one would say that these are some of the outcomes, although the court did leave the door open for individuals to discuss their racial background in statements that they would write to the universities.
Do you think there are any other factors that could be at play here, aside from that decision, that could be impacting the racial diversity of these schools?
Well, it's also worth looking at what the Chief Justice said when he posited that the outcomes were not clear in terms of how they benefited society, essentially. And that's pretty loaded when you think about it, because these students who are admitted, they must graduate. And MIT was graduating its students that were Indigenous, its Latino students, its African-American students, its students that were first generation. And as an empirical question, were those scientists and those who were being educated there and going on to other careers, were those careers benefiting American society? And imagine that MIT would say that, yes, it has a very successful alumni base that included Indigenous students, Latino students, and Black students, and that they did very well not only for the university, but for American society. So what remains of this are a number of other questions that extend to other areas such as law, areas such as medicine, and areas where in poor communities, some individuals may not go to serve, but they are definitely needed.
We know some institutions are now trying to find other ways to have a more diverse campus population. Michelle Goodwin, interesting information. Thank you so much for speaking with us this morning.
Thank you.
All right, let's get to what's making financial headlines this morning. The U.S. Postal Service is setting big budget goals for the future. CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and other money news. Good morning, Silvana.
Hey, Stephen. Good morning. Happy Friday to you. Yeah. So the U.S. Postal Service is seeking to save $30 billion over the next decade. The agency is proposing several changes, including the adjusting of pickup and drop-off times and faster delivery of some classes of mail. It will seek feedback from the mailing and shipping community during a virtual conference next month. The Postal Service says changes won't go into effect until after the election and the peak holiday shipping season. Meanwhile, Uber will start offering self-driving cars from GM's Cruise unit on its platform next year. Cruise has been trying to regain traction after grounding its fleet last year following an accident in which one of its vehicles struck and dragged a pedestrian. California regulators pulled the company's operating license. Uber says the offering will start early next year in a single market. And Instagram is borrowing a page from MySpace. Users can now add a song to their profile. It will show up in your bio and will be featured there until you remove it or replace it. But unlike MySpace songs, these won't autoplay. Instagram is launching the feature in collaboration with pop star Sabrina Carpenter. Her official profile will include a teaser of a new song called Taste. Wow, the memories it brings back of picking the perfect song for my MySpace page. Oh my God.
I thought you were going to say bringing back the top 8. That caused so much controversy for my teenage self.
Oh yeah, totally,
we don't want
totally.
that. Right.
No, let's not.
No, not at all. All right, Silvana, thanks so much.
You got it.
Well, summer may be winding down, but that means it's time to bring out the face paint and grills for the return of college football. Two of the most popular teams in the country will go head-to-head in Ireland to kick off the new season. 25,000 Florida State and Georgia Tech fans will travel to Dublin to cheer on their teams in tomorrow's season opener. Here with a preview of the action is senior writer for The Athletic, Nicole Auerbach. Nicole, good morning. Thanks for being here. Dublin is bracing for that full American college experience this weekend. So what's the excitement like on the ground there?
Yeah, I mean, it's super exciting. Everyone loves to play week 0 because you get all the spotlight on your team. And this is an ACC conference game with a team in Florida State that was this close to making the college football playoff a year ago. So it is quite a matchup to get things started. I always think of week 0 as kind of an appetizer, and we get the main course Labor Day weekend. But this is just enough to whet our appetite and intrigue us.
A little Irish appetizer. I like that. And we're entering sort of a new era of college football, Nicole. This season, 12 teams will now have a shot at the playoffs. What will that look like, and how are fans reacting to it?
Well, I think fans are really excited about this because it's going to keep more teams alive in the hunt longer into the season. And that's something that this sport really needs. It wants to continue to grow nationally. And what this will do will mean, hey, you could survive an early season loss. You're not going to get written off. And what this will mean is, in reality, is that there will be 10, 15, maybe 20 teams still in the hunt in November. So that's a lot of meaningful games as the season is wrapping up, plus more rounds to the actual college football playoff once it starts being played, including first-round games on campus, which is going to be something that is unprecedented and pretty awesome because it gets to the roots of what college football is.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. And Nicole, we also saw that major expansion of the SEC, the Big Ten, the ACC. What sort of changes will we see at the schools in those conferences, and what does that mean for college football as a whole?
Well, you'll be hearing and seeing a lot about all the travel that everyone has had to do and all the logistics to make this possible, because you have teams like Stanford and Cal in the ACC and Oregon and Washington in the Big Ten. So those are big trips. But I think for fans, where we'll really feel it is we're going to look at these schedules week to week and say, wow, these are loaded, because these conferences added up the bigger brands, right? So Georgia, Texas is now an SEC conference game, as is Ohio State, Oregon. These are games that we used to have to wait for schools to schedule and then wait like 15 years until they played the games. Now these are conference games. We may not get them every year, but overall the schedule just feels more loaded week to week.
Yeah, that sounds good. An exciting season ahead. A lot to look forward to. Nicole Auerbach, thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely.
And coming up this morning on Morning News Now, if it's Friday, you know we've got your can't miss list on deck. It's the latest and greatest from the world of entertainment, just in time for your weekend. So grab that popcorn, because we've got your pop culture fix coming up next. And finally this hour, it's time for your weekly can't miss list of the films and shows you need to see this weekend. And here to help walk us through it all is journalist and TV personality Baker Machado. So good morning, Baker. Thanks for being here. A lot to talk about here, including the highly anticipated The Crow reimagining. That was a comic book. It was also a film back in, I think, 1994.
Wow, good job.
Thank you. Yes. What is this different? How is this going to be?
Well, obviously the cast's a little bit different in this one. Yes. We remember, of course, Brandon Lee tragically died on set because of a gun that was on the set. This one stars Bill Skarsgård and FKA Twigs. Now, of course, as I mentioned, we lost Brandon Lee in the first one. So this one, a lot different because there were no real guns on set. Wow. Director Rupert Sanders basically had all prop guns, all fake metal and plastic guns on set. He said safety was the #1 priority on set here. The reviews, though, not so good on this one, Stephen. So I don't know if you liked the first one a lot that you want to go see it. This one, 21% right now on Rotten Tomatoes, so not good. Some of the reviews range from corny to forgettable, but of course you could be the judge for yourself. It's in theaters right now.
Yeah, sometimes you got to click on those audience reviews, because critics and audience don't always jive
sometimes
together.
Very savage, those critics.
Oh, I did learn that. So we have another star-studded, edge-of-your-seat thriller type movie. It's called Blink Twice, directed by Zoe Kravitz. What can you tell us about that?
All right, so this one is the post-Me Too thriller directed by Zoe Kravitz. Now, Amazon MGM, Stephen, this is really important, released a trigger warning this week ahead of the release, so basically get ahead of all of this, saying that they are alerting viewers to depictions of sexual violence and abuse in this film. You typically see this in stuff like 13 Reasons Why and a bunch of other things. This film, if you don't know, revolves around a tech billionaire being played by Channing Tatum, who brings a waitress to a private island, and things go from really good to really sinister very, very, very fast. Reviews really good on this one, over 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. And of course, all the attention being drawn to Zoe Kravitz and Channing Tatum and their real life love story through this. Interestingly, Zoe Kravitz did an interview where she said she actually pitched this idea to Channing Tatum to be in this film years ago, before they really even knew each other. And on set and working together in their collaboration, that's where their romance started to blossom. And now we see that they're engaged because of this. So this film clearly going to be a big one for them.
That's almost reason enough to see
I know, right?
So something pretty different here, Between the Temples. This one looks pretty fun. I also hear there's like an important message behind it.
Yeah, this one is a really sweet movie, by the way. Jason Schwartzman and Carol Kane, the great actors in this one. Jason Schwartzman plays a cantor who is questioning his faith, and he stumbles upon Carol Kane, who is his old school teacher, who wants to have her first bar mitzvah. And so they basically sort of grow together throughout all of this. They both, interestingly, were on the Today Show this week, and they were telling Al Roker that this was a project that they wanted to do together for so long, that they were so grateful to finally be able to work together. Reviews on this one, amazing. It's over 80% right now on Rotten Tomatoes. It is in theaters today, and it's getting a lot of really good publicity here.
I love Carol Kane. She's on the Strange New Worlds, the Star Trek spinoff.
Well, just her voice also is amazing. And she also sort of depicted the character after her real-life mom, who's still alive in her 90s, by the way.
Wow, well, we love to hear that. Talking about streaming now, there's a lot, including the new Scott Peterson crime documentary, Face to Face. So what can you my husband already started watching this one, so I think it might be good.
I mean, there's so much Lacey Peterson content that is out there right now. now, of course, if you've seen the Netflix documentary, this one way different because now for the first time since 2003, we're hearing from Scott Peterson. He's actually on camera telling his side of the story from behind prison. And as you know, Stephen, from watching this, he reveals in this documentary he was expecting to be exonerated the day that the jury released that verdict. He thought he was going home that day, which is so interesting. Of course, he has maintained his innocence. He's petitioning for a brand new trial. He still thinks it was the burglars across the street that killed Lacey Peterson. All 3 episodes, of course, available right now over on Peacock. Very good.
All right. Speaking of Peacock, we only have about a minute left. We want to ask you about The Killer.
Yep.
Seems like a great weekend popcorn kind of flick.
Yeah, this is a remake of John Woo's 1989 classic. This one, though, set in Paris, not in Hong Kong. This, of course, about criminal colleagues going after an assassin. Nathalie Emmanuel stars in this. This was actually supposed to go to Lupita Nyong'o, but she turned this role down. Sam Worthington and Omar Sy are also in this. This, of course, all on Peacock right now.
All right. Even those previews look
amazing,
intense.
right?
Wow, a lot of action there. Okay, quickly, we can get to this last question about Incoming, sort of a classic high school party flick.
Yes.
Maybe a throwback to the 40-Year-Old Virgin Superbad.
Oh, yes, but this one not getting good reviews whatsoever. This, of course, available for you over on Netflix. Of course, we've seen this story before. Kids in high school trying to get to that cool, famous party. But as we know, these movies, these R-rated comedies don't get greenlit very much anymore. We're still in the superhero phase of movies. So this is why this is going straight to streaming over on Netflix.
It's crazy because you would think that if something is sort of a bit of a throwback, people really love that retro feel, not actually getting it.
People missing Jonah Hill and all those other ones.
Yeah, well, they'll just have to stream those as well. All right, Baker Machado, thanks so much.
Thanks, Stephen.
And thank you so much for joining us for this hour of Morning News Now. Don't go anywhere, though. Your news continues right now. All right, good morning and happy Friday. I'm Stephen Romo in for Joe and Savannah today. And right now on Morning News Now, Harris makes history. Overnight, the vice president becoming the first woman of color to accept a major party's presidential nomination on the 4th and final day of the Democratic National Convention. Her message to America, one of strength, unity, and with a special emphasis on hope.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
We'll bring you all the major moments from Chicago as the race for the White House enters a new phase. Also this morning, the FDA officially giving the green light to a new batch of COVID vaccines from both Pfizer and Moderna. So when will these new shots start going into arms and what makes them different? And when might be the best time for you to make an appointment? The doctor is in, coming up. Plus, a long-awaited flight plan home for those 2 Starliner astronauts aboard the International Space Station might come as soon as tomorrow. We'll bring you the latest and what could happen if NASA decides to bring that spacecraft back to Earth without its crew on board. And Labor Day may still be a little more than a week away, but some Americans are already getting a jump on travel for summer's last hurrah. What you need to know before you go, as travel insiders expect another record-breaking romp leading into fall. Good morning, I'm Stephen Romo, and we begin this hour with a night of history at the Democratic National Convention. Vice President Kamala Harris becoming the first Black and South Asian woman to formally accept the Democratic Party's nomination for president. In her speech last night, Harris laid out her goals and slammed her rival, former President Trump, in front of a raucous crowd at the Democratic National Convention. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander has the latest from Chicago.
Vice President Kamala Harris taking a step toward history.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States.
Harris weaving her life story into a vision for the country.
My mother was a brilliant, 5-foot-tall, brown woman with an accent. She taught us to never complain about injustice, but do something about it.
Following a night highlighting Harris's family, her great nieces teaching the audience how to pronounce her name.
First you say comma like a comma in a sentence.
Later, watching her speech in this viral photo. The vice president framing the choice facing America.
As a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward.
But Harris also spent considerable time criticizing former President Trump.
In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States.
Harris promising to cut taxes for the middle class, bring back the bipartisan border security bill, and pledging to restore reproductive rights, calling out her opponent.
He plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their minds.
Harris also making her most extensive remarks so far on the Israel-Hamas war, saying she'll protect Israel's right to defend itself, but also calling the situation in Gaza devastating.
Now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done.
And continuing on foreign policy, attacking Mr. Trump's approach toward foreign leaders.
I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators, because in the enduring struggle between democracy and tyranny, I know where I stand.
Harris ending on optimism.
It is now our turn to do what generations before us have done, to uphold the awesome responsibility that comes with the greatest privilege on earth, the privilege and pride of being an American.
Mr. Trump responding in real time online, saying Harris did not give enough specifics on national security and the economy, and calling into Fox News.
She is a horrible, horrible person to run this country. We won't have a country if she gets elected.
After the balloon drop, we caught up with the vice president backstage.
What did you like about it? It felt good. I mean, listen, we've got 75 days to go, so that was good, and now we got to move on.
We got work to do. Enjoy one night. Nice to see you guys.
And our thanks to Peter Alexander for that report. Let's get some analysis with NBC News national politics reporter John Allen. John, good to have you with us. So what did you make of Harris's speech and the way she incorporated life lessons, many from her mother? Was that all effective?
Yeah, I mean, she really had a dual charge last night. One was, of course, to continue the Democratic attack on Donald Trump, but also to introduce herself to the public. You know, you would think, obviously, she's vice president, people recognize her name, but they might not really know her whole life story. And so one of the things she's trying to do as a candidate in this very short window of a presidential election is make sure she gets the positive out there. And so last night was really an opportunity, and one of the big opportunities outside of paid advertising to do just that. And so you heard her talk a lot about what her parents told her, the advice they gave her, and how that formed the bedrock of who she is.
One of the biggest sort of points of contentions at the DNC was the war in Gaza. There were pro-Palestinian protests happening outside of the event the entire time. There was also a lot of criticism last night when the Democratic Party again denied requests from the uncommitted national movement to allow a Palestinian speaker on that main stage to speak. Do we know why that ended up being refused? And do you think Harris's comments, which were pretty extensive, do you think they may have helped ease the concerns of those protesters at all?
I mean, the reason that that the uncommitted delegates weren't afforded a speaking slot is that the Democratic Party did not want, and of course Kamala Harris and her team were really in charge of what's going on at that convention, did not want something divisive to happen in the middle of, what is otherwise a celebration of her and of the Democratic, effort to keep the White House and beat Donald Trump. And obviously, if there were, pro-Palestinian speakers who were not on message, that would expose the wound that is existing and in some ways deepening in the Democratic Party. So that's why that didn't happen. She basically reiterated the Biden administration position. So did Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the progressive leaders, Congresswoman from New York. So did Bernie Sanders, the Vermont senator, reiterating the administration position, but doing so with rhetoric that sounded a little bit more, considerate of what's going on with the Palestinian and pro-Palestinian folks. It continues to be a problem.
Yeah, more to watch there. John, though, only a couple seconds left. I wanted to ask you, how does the campaign, can they keep the momentum going forward these last 74 days till Election Day?
I think they're hoping that they can keep that momentum going forward. She's got a debate coming up September 10th, not too long from now. That'll be the first real test of how she does when she's confronted, when she's not necessarily scripted for every answer. And so I think that'll be a key indicator of whether she's going to be able to do that.
That'll be something to see indeed. All right, John, thanks so much. Well, the FDA has now officially approved the updated COVID vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer. The rollout for these shots expected to happen in the coming days, and experts say they will protect against severe illness. And now this makes the third time the vaccine has been updated since the original series was introduced. NBC News medical fellow Dr. Akshay Syal joins us now for more on this. Doc, good to see you this morning. So these vaccines were made to protect against the new variants. So do we know how effective they'll actually be?
It's a great question, Stephen. So Peter Marks, who's in charge of the vaccine approvals over at the FDA, he said in an interview he's expecting these vaccines to be about 50 to 60% effective in preventing illness, meaning any sort of symptoms at all, and about 80 to 90% effective in preventing severe disease or hospitalization. And I think, Stephen, there's a couple things people need to know about these shots. And, one, they are updated to reflect the more common circulating variants out in terms of what we're seeing with the virus out right now. And two, the timing of this is pretty significant, Stephen. This is weeks earlier than we saw last year. And I think, part of that is because we're sort of in this large summer wave, what may end up being the largest summer wave of COVID-19 we've seen to date, leading people to sort of wonder when is the best time to get this shot, Stephen.
Yeah, do we know when that is? I always think of viruses spreading when we're inside for the winter and for fall more, but we did have this summer spike. So when is the best time to get them?
It's unusual, right? We really certainly didn't expect this large of a summer wave this many years into the virus. And I think, when people are wondering when the best time is, it really depends. So if you're somebody who's high risk, if you're over the age of 65, if you have, a bunch of chronic medical conditions like diabetes or heart disease, you want to get it pretty soon. It should be available in the next coming days, and you want to get it sooner rather than later. But Stephen, here, if you're recently infected, if you're like me and you got COVID during this large summer wave, you want to delay it by at least 3 months. The vaccine may actually not be doing a lot if you get it so soon after infection. So that's a big point there. And finally, for everyone else who's young, healthy, and low risk, you may want to wait until about October, because we are expecting a winter wave as well, and you want to have as much protection as you can headed into the colder weather.
And Doc, what about these variants? There was a time people were watching the headlines so close for information about new variants, but we've got new ones now. People may not know. Are there any different symptoms we should know about?
So, the only way to tell which virus you have is really getting a test. But what we've seen, Stephen, over the years is COVID, really started out as a lower respiratory tract disease, meaning it used to cause severe disease. People were often ending up, in the ICUs and in hospitals. But what we've seen as our immunity has built up is, the symptoms we're seeing kind of match a lot with the other respiratory viruses, including sore throat, sneezing, runny nose. So, these symptoms are common amongst all the viruses we sort of see right now. And really the only way to tell if it is COVID is to take a test, Stephen.
Another thing people may have not been paying attention to is when you actually do get this vaccine and boosters and all of that, is there a cost now that people need to know about?
There certainly can be. The good news is for most people with insurance, we are expecting insurance to cover this. But for those without it, we're expecting about $150 a dose. And, it can be a deterrent to some people, especially as we're looking to increase vaccination rates. But again, Stephen, the good news, if you are insured, this should be something that you do get covered.
All right. Important information. Dr. Akshay Syal, thanks so much. All right, we want to bring you now an update on the situation currently unfolding 250 miles above the Earth. NASA is considering how to safely bring home those 2 Starliner astronauts who've been stuck in the International Space Station since June on what was supposed to just be a 10-day trip. Here's NBC News Now anchor Gotti Schwartz with the latest.
Hey there, it has been a long several months for astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore circling above us more than 250 miles in the space station, while teams down here on the ground are working nonstop trying to figure out how to get them home safely. And it looks like tomorrow we may finally get that answer. This morning, a new update on the 2 astronauts still up in space. On Saturday, NASA leaders will hold a readiness review from the Johnson Space Center in Houston and are expected to announce a final decision on when astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams can finally return home.
And liftoff of Starliner and Atlas V.
The pair launched into space in June on the first crewed test of Boeing's Starliner ship. It was supposed to be a 10-day mission, but helium leaks and issues with the propulsion system have left the craft and the crew docked at the International Space Station for more than 2 months. The main problem, thrusters that are needed for safe re-entry. In a statement, NASA says that along with Boeing, they have gathered data both in space and on the ground regarding the Starliner spacecraft's propulsion and helium systems to better understand the ongoing technical challenges.
Our big concern is having a successful deorbit burn, making sure that the prop system works just the way it needs to all the way through the deorbit burn.
If a decision is made not to return Starliner to Earth with the astronauts on board, one potential scenario would involve sending the spacecraft back without its crew and leaving 2 of 4 seats open on an upcoming SpaceX flight to the space station that's already been pushed back from this month to next. So Wilmore and Williams could return with that team. But that would mean keeping them in space until February.
We are humans, and this is hard on crew members and their families, and we take that into account. But again, as professional astronauts, they're prepared for this, and they're doing great.
Welcome aboard the International Space Station first. It's a great place to be, a great place to live, a great place to work.
Last month, the astronauts telling our Tom Costello they're confident in efforts to bring them back home safely.
We've been thoroughly busy up here. They're working very hard on the ground to make sure that we will be able to come home before too long.
Now, Saturday's review will include a lot more information on the status of those thrusters, the leaks, and whether or not the crews should proceed with undocking and sending the Starliner back home from the space station. But it has now been 79 days and counting. Back to you.
Wow, that's most certainly going to be made into a movie. Gotti, thank you. All right, time now for a check of your Morning News Now weather. Meteorologist Angie Lassman joining us again. Hey, Angie.
Hi there, Stephen. We've got no surprise, more heat in store. Feeling like summer across parts of the southern plains, and that's exactly where you'll find those heat alerts this morning. Still 16 million people included in that, from San Antonio to Oklahoma City, and including parts of New Mexico, too. This is the area of concern for today, but really it's going to be a whole lot of folks that are talking warmer than normal temperatures through the weekend. Here's what we're looking at this afternoon. 105 in Lubbock. That'll certainly get your attention, running way warm across parts of Texas, New Mexico, Kansas, Oklahoma. We've even got Denver a touch above normal with a high of just 89 degrees today. Cooler air way back to the west, specifically the Pacific Northwest, where temperatures are going to top out in Bend, Oregon, just into the low 60s. We're running cool for this time of year. So it's a little bit of a tale of kind of mixed highs across the middle of the country versus the western portions of the country. And that stays with us for tomorrow, too. That's going to be the trend. We see that heat spread a little farther to the north. Sioux Falls into the mid-80s, Wichita ending up above 100, and that's the actual temperature. Your feels like temperatures in some of these spots are going to be closer to 105, 107, 111 in some of the warmer locations. Even Chicago, I know you've had a bit of a break from all that heat, but we're going to get back at it here with a temperature of 90 degrees for your high on Saturday, and that takes us right into our Sunday and beyond. These temperatures aren't going to let up. We're going to continue to see really warm conditions across parts of the South, but even again, the Great Lakes and parts of the Midwest, 97 degrees for St. Louis on Monday. So the heat is sticking around. Las Vegas is included in those triple-digit temperatures by the time next week rolls around. And we've still got that kind of cooler and more mild conditions settled in to parts of the Pacific Northwest. So we'll be watching for that here for the short term. As far as parts of the East, this is where we've really seen a kind of refreshing couple of days. You woke up to temperatures in the 40s and 50s in some of these spots across the Northeast and the Great Lakes, and we've topped out into the 70s, into the low 80s in a lot of spots, and our humidity levels have been low. That doesn't stay with us here as we get into the especially end of the weekend in New York City. Mid 80s will return. We'll kind of keep that going into early next week. But even Louisville, you top out at 97 degrees on Tuesday. So that bit of a break from the heat, you're not going to see that lasting. Chicago will head to 94 degrees on Monday. Not much of an improvement by the time we get into Tuesday. So big picture look for today, really pleasant across the Northeast. It's still going to be one of those days where it's enjoyable for folks across the Great Lakes too, and plenty of sunshine. Honestly, if you live east of the Mississippi, we don't have a whole lot of rain in the picture unless you're in the Sunshine State. Ironic, right? They're not living up to their name, and it doesn't change a whole lot over the weekend. We're going to deal with that rain across Florida here for the next couple of days. As we look ahead to your Saturday plans, a great weekend for the East. Again, temperatures a little warmer, but still plenty of sunshine for a whole lot of people. That sizzling heat stays with us across the South. The rain that I mentioned in Florida, yeah, that's Saturday, and it's Sunday too for those storms. It'll be even hotter for the middle of the country, though, Stephen, by the time we wrap up our weekend.
And Angie, I just learned you also want to hang on to summer like I do.
I sure do.
This will outrage you. I saw up in some cubicles Halloween decorations already up.
Arrest them immediately.
Straight to jail. I 100% agree. All right. Angie, thank you. All right. Summer might be winding down, but it's still here, and travel is soaring. Millions are expected to take to the skies or hit the road for Labor Day weekend, and experts say it might be one of the busiest they've ever seen. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda has everything you need to know before you go.
Hey there. Well, you'll see people on the road already, and experts say some of them are getting a really early start to the holiday weekend as they look to extend the last opportunity to take advantage of a summer vacation. This comes as more people than ever are taking off for Labor Day.
If you're getting ready to get away, buckle up for bumper-to-bumper traffic and packed planes, as a record number of travelers are expected to be on the go for summer's last hurrah.
More people we are projecting will be traveling over Labor Day this year.
According to AAA, domestic travel is expected to be up 9% compared to Labor Day weekend last year, as some are already getting an early start this weekend, taking advantage of lower gas prices, down about 50 cents per gallon on average compared to last year. Meantime, airports bracing for a record rise. The TSA is prepping to screen more than 17 million people during the 7 days surrounding the holiday, anticipating the busiest Labor Day travel period on record.
A lot of people take off these last 2 weeks of August. This is the time of year when you want to squeeze in that final summer vacation.
Those who have already hit the skies realizing they've got plenty of company, so giving themselves plenty of time.
Before, within 2 hours to be there waiting on the airport, now you have to come within 3 or 4 hours more for be on time there, because you never know what's going to happen.
Still, industry insiders say this is only the beginning. According to Hopper, come next weekend, Atlanta, Chicago, and Dallas-Fort Worth will be the busiest airports in the country, with each sending out around 9,000 flights. The flock of flyers attracted to cheaper airfare, down 5% this year.
You're saving per ticket about $50 compared to what you would have paid Labor Day weekend of 2019.
Experts say even last-minute bookers can still save if they act fast before prices spike next week ahead of summer's unofficial end.
So the best way to save on flights is to actually leave later and return later. Hopper says it can make the difference of hundreds of dollars if you take a flight on Saturday and come back on Tuesday. If you're driving, if you're getting behind the wheel, it's a different story. You want to leave early in the morning to avoid the worst of traffic. This area, for instance, could see traffic spike some 40% next Friday afternoon. Back to you.
All right, we've been warned. Emily, thanks. Well, in consumer news this morning, we're taking a look at how companies are getting creative to boost business. Fast food restaurants now aiming to outdo each other on value, and the latest deals are coming from an unlikely partnership, Burger King and Walmart. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung joins us now to talk more about this. Hey, Brian.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, I mean, look, this is a food fight between these companies that are trying to, as you mentioned, out-discount each other to score your dollars. But it's not just the fast food companies in the ring, because now from the rafters comes the retailers. Yep, that's right. Retailers are now teaming up with restaurants to offer some big-time savings.
It's a new spin on a classic marketing strategy. Go shopping and get a perk. Walmart set to serve up perks with cheese. That's because starting next month, Walmart shoppers will get a free Whopper every 3 months if they're members of the Walmart Plus service. On top of a quarterly burger, Walmart Plus members will get 25% off all Burger King digital orders.
I'm hungry just talking about it.
The company is saying in a statement that the benefit for members paying the $98 a year subscription is designed to save members time and money, adding they wanted to offer a cost-effective solution.
It makes a difference.
The 25% discount would be nice.
It's the latest coupling between a major retailer and a food app. Amazon has been teaming up with Grubhub to waive delivery fees. The retailer gets a paid subscriber, and the user saves on food.
All kinds of restaurant companies are looking for more ways to give their loyalty members value.
The bottom line, the biggest deal for consumers who have balked at rising costs for dining out, up 4.1% over the last year.
Prices are really, really high.
Earlier in the summer, brands like McDonald's and Wendy's extended offers like a $5 meal deal to entice diners back in. And the deal offers keep coming. Subway announcing today that it's going to offer a $6.99 deal on all footlongs starting next week. Not quite the $5 footlongs of years past, but designed to help a diner, quote, stretched more than ever. Is the summer of savings here to stay?
It's probably going to be the summer, fall, and maybe even the winter of savings.
Companies are even turning to, well, more creative ways to draw consumers back in. Chick-fil-A reportedly set to start its own streaming service focusing on family-friendly shows.
It's a way to potentially get revenue and to potentially market the brand in ways that you might not think of otherwise.
And if you think a streaming channel is crazy, don't forget that it's not quite unprecedented. Stephen, Burger King had a suite of games that had sold on Xbox in the 2000s. And of course, McDonald's, right? They built a whole franchise off of characters like the Hamburglar and Grimace. So, you know, what's another streaming channel? Anyway,
That's true.
Right?
The Chick-fil-A channel. I did not have that on my 2024 bingo card.
Neither did I.
There you go. Who knew? All right, Brian, thanks so much. And thank you so much for joining us for this hour of Morning News Now. Don't go anywhere, though. Your news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.